The year was 1885, and Colorado Territory was no place for the faint-hearted. Sarah Mitchell stood alone on the windswept platform of Pine Creek Station, her solitary trunk beside her, the afternoon sun beating mercilessly on her pale complexion. She shifted her weight, wincing as pain shot through her right leg, the same leg that had made her an object of pity back in Philadelphia, and now apparently had made her unworthy of the man who had promised to meet her train. 6 hours had passed since her arrival. The station was nearly empty now, save for the stationmaster, who occasionally cast sympathetic glances her way. Sarah had traveled over 1,800 miles to marry a man she'd never met, a cattle rancher named William Cooper, who had placed an advertisement seeking a practical Christian woman of good character to share in the building of a prosperous homestead. Their letters had spanned 10 months. Not once had she mentioned her limp. Not once had he failed to respond, until today. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As the sun began to set and the chill of the mountain evening crept in, Sarah faced the bitter truth. There would be no wedding, there would be no home. There was only the cold reality that once again her imperfection had determined her worth. In someone's eyes, what Sarah couldn't know was that before the night was through, her path would cross with Nathaniel Hayes, the town's doctor, a man who saw not with ordinary eyes, but with the heart of someone who understood that true strength often came disguised as vulnerability. Sarah Mitchell had been born to a respectable Philadelphia family, the kind that wasn't wealthy enough to be prominent, but was comfortable enough to maintain appearances. Until she was 8 years old, her life had followed the predictable path of a merchant's daughter. Then came the accident, a runaway carriage that crushed her right leg when it careened onto the sidewalk. The doctors had saved the limb, but she was left with a pronounced limp when it finally healed. Such a tragedy, the whispers followed her. Poor George Mitchell, a daughter with a defect, will be difficult to marry off. Her father, to his credit, never treated her as damaged goods. Her mother, however, viewed Sarah's condition as a reflection on the family's standing. By the time Sarah reached 27, her younger sisters had all married, leaving her alone with parents who had resigned themselves to supporting an unmarriageable daughter indefinitely. "You'll always have a place with us," her father had said kindly on her 27th birthday, patting her hand across the dinner table. That night, Sarah had stared at her reflection in the mirror of her childhood bedroom. The face that looked back at her wasn't unattractive. Auburn hair that fell in soft waves around a heart-shaped face, clear green eyes, a small nose, and full lips. It was only when she stood and walked that the spell was broken. 2 weeks later, she found the newspaper advertisement while helping her father organize his study. Matrimonial opportunities, connecting Eastern ladies with Western gentlemen of means. Sarah had heard of such arrangements, desperate men in the Western territories seeking wives from the more populated East. It was something spoken of in hushed tones. Respectable women didn't resort to such measures, but as she read the column of advertisements, one in particular caught her eye. Colorado cattle rancher, 35, established homestead of 320 acres, seeking educated woman of good character to share in building a prosperous future. Requires practical nature and fondness for country living. Responds to all sincere inquiries. William Cooper, Pine Creek, Colorado Territory. There was no mention of beauty or physical perfection, only practicality and education, qualities Sarah possessed in abundance. That night she drafted her first letter to William Cooper, careful to showcase her intelligence, her skills in household management, her experience helping with her father's business ledgers. She enclosed a photograph that showed only her seated form, her face visible, but her leg carefully hidden beneath the drape of her skirts. His response came 5 weeks later, earnest, articulate, and filled with descriptions of his ranch, the township of Pine Creek, and his hopes for finding a partner who valued hard work and companionship. "I have no use for frivolous city girls," he wrote. "What matters here is fortitude and character." Over the following months, their correspondence deepened. William described building the two-story farmhouse himself, the small apple orchard he'd planted, the plans for expanding his herd. Sarah shared her thoughts on books, her recipes, her hopes for children someday. With each exchange, she felt increasingly certain that this man, this stranger, might value her for her mind and heart, rather than judge her for her imperfect body. After 10 months, his proposal arrived. "I believe we would suit each other well, as husband and wife. If you agree, I will send funds for your journey west. We can be married by Reverend Sullivan the day of your arrival." Sarah accepted immediately, ignoring her mother's horror and her father's concerns. "This is my chance," she told them, "to be more than just the pitied daughter, the spinster aunt, the burden." Her father had eventually relented, providing her with a modest dowry and helping arrange her journey. Her mother had packed her trunk with linens and household items, her disapproval evident in every crisp fold. "You've not told him about your condition," her mother had stated on the morning of Sarah's departure. "It wasn't a question. He values character and practical skills. My leg doesn't affect either," Sarah had replied, more confidently than she felt. Her mother's tight-lipped expression spoke volumes. "Men have specific expectations of a wife, Sarah, particularly men in such rustic circumstances. Now, standing, alone at Pine Creek Station," those words returned to haunt her. Had William Cooper received her final letter announcing her arrival date? Had he changed his mind? Or had he been there among the crowd, seen her limping down the train steps and quietly withdrawn without revealing himself? "Miss, we're closing the station for the night," the stationmaster called, sympathy and impatience mingling in his voice. "Is there someone I can help you contact?" Sarah blinked back tears. "I was to meet my fiancé, William Cooper. Do you know him?" The stationmaster's expression changed subtly. "Cooper's place is about 8 miles northwest of town, but I haven't seen him in a couple weeks." He hesitated. "There's a boarding house run by Mrs. Porter 3 streets over. Respectable place. You could stay there tonight." Sarah nodded numbly, the reality of her situation sinking in. She had exactly $32 to her name, enough for perhaps a week's lodging. After that, "I'll need to hire someone and take me to Mr. Cooper's ranch tomorrow," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The stationmaster coughed uncomfortably. "Well, now, that might be... I mean to say, if the gentleman hasn't come to meet you as arranged." "I've traveled over 800 miles, sir. I intend to at least hear from Mr. Cooper's own lips why he's reconsidered our arrangement." The forced confidence in her voice surprised even Sarah. With directions to the boarding house and the promise of assistance with her trunk in the morning, Sarah began the 3-block walk, her right leg dragging slightly more than usual after the long hours of standing. Pine Creek was a typical frontier town, a main street lined with false-fronted businesses, muddy side streets dotted with modest homes, the imposing structures of a church and schoolhouse standing as twin sentinels of civilization. As she walked, Sarah noted the general store, the telegraph office, a small restaurant, and a doctor's office, with a shingle reading Dr. Nathaniel Hayes, physician and surgeon. Dominating the far end of the street was a 2-story building with a large sign proclaiming it the Mountain Rose Saloon. Despite her exhaustion and despair, Sarah found herself cataloging these details with the practical eye she'd developed helping her father. Pine Creek was clearly prospering. The businesses looked established. The sidewalks were wooden rather than dirt, and several buildings featured glass windows rather than oiled paper. Mrs. Porter's boarding house proved to be a neat, white-painted structure with a small garden in front. The widow herself was a brisk, grey-haired woman who eyed Sarah's simple traveling dress with quick assessment. $1 a night, including breakfast. $1.50 with all meals, she stated without preamble. No gentlemen visitors. In the rooms. No liquor on the premises. Quiet hours after 9. I understand. I'll take the full board option, please, just for a few days. Sarah fumbled with her reticule. The widow's expression softened slightly as she noticed Sarah's limp. You're a long way from home, I'd guess. Philadelphia. Yes. How did you know? The accent and the quality of that dress, though it's seen better days. The widow gestured for Sarah to follow her up a narrow staircase. What brings a Philadelphia lady to Pine Creek? We don't get many Easterners, especially unaccompanied women. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah hesitated. I was to meet someone. He appears to have been delayed. The widow stopped at the top of the stairs, turning to study Sarah's face with shrewd eyes. William Cooper's mail-order bride, are you? Sarah couldn't contain her surprise. You know about me? Mrs. Porter's expression was unreadable. Small town, news travels. Come along, I'll show you to your room. The room was small, but clean. A narrow bed with an iron frame, a washstand with pitcher and bowl, a 3-drawer chest, and a small window overlooking the back garden. After the widow left, Sarah sank onto the bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back all day. She had been a fool, a desperate, hopeful fool to believe that any man would overlook her imperfection once he saw it. William Cooper had probably watched her from a distance, decided she wasn't what he wanted, and simply left her to her fate. And what was that fate now? Her family was 3 weeks' journey away. Her funds would last perhaps 10 days. She had no friends, no connections, and no prospects in this rugged mountain town. For the first time since she'd made the decision to come west, Sarah allowed herself to admit the magnitude of her miscalculation. She had gambled everything on William Cooper's character, a man she knew only through carefully crafted letters. Morning brought no relief to Sarah's spirits, but it did bring clarity. After a night of intermittent sleep, she had decided on a course of action. She would hire transportation to William Cooper's ranch. She would confront him directly, and regardless of the outcome, she would find a way to support herself in Pine Creek until she could save enough for a return ticket to Philadelphia. Mrs. Porter provided a breakfast of cornmeal mush, bacon, and strong coffee. The other boarders, a male clerk from the general store and an elderly female school teacher, eyed Sarah curiously, but maintained polite conversation. Miss Mitchell is looking to hire someone to take her out to Cooper Place today, Mrs. Porter announced as she refilled coffee cups. Mr. Bennett, doesn't your brother run a wagon service? The clerk nodded. He does, ma'am, but he's taken a load up to the Silverton mining camp. Won't be back for 3 days. I could take her. All heads turned to the doorway where a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s stood, hat in hand. His clothing was of good quality, though not fashionable. Dark trousers, a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a black waistcoat. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes, suggesting he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. Dr. Hayes, Mrs. Porter said with a nod that wasn't entirely approving. I wasn't expecting you this morning. Came by to check on Mr. Simmons. His cough is worse. The man, Dr. Hayes, shifted his gaze to Sarah. You're looking to get out. To Cooper's Place? Sarah straightened her spine. I am. Are you acquainted with Mr. Cooper? A shadow passed over Dr. Hayes's features. You could say that. He glanced at Mrs. Porter. I've got business that way myself this morning. Could take the lady out there, save her the expense of hiring Bennett's wagon. The widow's lips thinned. "Miss Mitchell, Dr. Hayes here is a respectable physician, but it might not be appropriate to—" "I'm offering the lady a courtesy ride, Mrs. Porter, not impropriety." Dr. Hayes interrupted mildly, "And I'm guessing she's eager to resolve her situation." Sarah looked between them, sensing undercurrents she didn't understand, but practicality won out over propriety. "I would appreciate the transportation, Dr. Hayes, if it's truly no imposition. I can be ready in 15 minutes. Dr. Hayes nodded. "I'll bring the buggy around front." After he left, the widow leaned close to Sarah. "Dr. Hayes is a good physician and a decent man, though he has his own burdens to bear. In Philadelphia, a young lady wouldn't ride alone with a gentleman she's just met." "We're not in Philadelphia," Sarah replied simply, "and I need to see Mr. Cooper today." Something in the widow's expression shifted. "Yes, I suppose you do." She patted Sarah's hand. "Your room will be waiting, whatever comes of it." 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself seated beside Dr. Nathaniel Hayes in a well-maintained buggy pulled by a handsome chestnut gelding. Her trunk had been left at the boarding house. This journey might end with her engagement intact, or it might reveal that she had no future with William Cooper. Either way, she hadn't wanted to appear presumptuous by bringing her belongings. They traveled in silence for the first mile, leaving the town behind and following a well-worn road that curved through stands of pine and aspen. Sarah kept her gaze fixed ahead, acutely aware of the man beside her. Despite his profession, there was nothing soft or sheltered about Nathaniel Hayes. He handled the horse with quiet confidence, his posture relaxed but alert. "Beautiful country," Sarah finally commented, the silence becoming uncomfortable. "Doctor," Hayes nodded. "Different from Philadelphia, I imagine." "Very. Everything's so vast. In Philadelphia, the buildings crowd together so closely that sometimes you forget there's sky above them." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "That's what drew me west after medical school. Space to breathe." He glanced at her. "Most Easterners find it unsettling at first." "I find it exhilarating," Sarah admitted, "even if it's also rather intimidating." They fell into silence again until Dr. Hayes spoke suddenly. "Miss Mitchell, there's something you should know before we reach Cooper's place." Sarah's heart stuttered. "Yes?" Dr. Hayes slowed the horse, turning slightly to face her. His expression was grave, his blue eyes direct. "William Cooper died 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him quickly. I attended him myself, but there was little I could do. His funeral was 10 days ago." The world seemed to stop. Sarah stared at him, unable to process his words. "That's not possible. I received a telegram from him just before I left Philadelphia, confirming our arrangements." Dr. Hayes's gaze was steady, sympathetic. "The telegraph office often holds messages to send in batches. It might have been sent before he fell ill, but delivered after. But surely someone would have—" Sarah's voice trailed off as realization dawned. "No one knew to contact me. From what I understand, Cooper kept mostly to himself. Few people knew he was corresponding with a potential bride." Dr. Hayes hesitated. "I'm sorry you've come all this way for nothing, Miss Mitchell." Sarah turned away, staring blindly at the passing landscape as she struggled to absorb this devastating news. Not rejection, then. Death. William Cooper hadn't abandoned her at the station out of disappointment. He simply no longer existed, and neither did the future she had imagined for herself. "I still want to see the ranch," she said finally, her voice barely audible. Dr. Hayes studied her face. "Are you certain? There's nothing there for you now." "I spent 10 months exchanging letters with William Cooper. I came 1-800 miles to be his wife. I need to see where he lived, where I would have lived." Sarah met his gaze, her chin lifting slightly. "Please." After a moment, Dr. Hayes nodded and flicked the reins, urging the horse forward. His foreman's been keeping things running. Man named Samuel Turner. Good man. They rode in silence for another 20 minutes before Dr. Hayes turned the buggy onto a narrower track that wound upward. As they crested a small rise, Sarah caught her breath. Below them stretched a picturesque valley centered around a two-story white farmhouse with a broad porch. A large barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals formed a rough half-circle. Behind it, a river meandered through rich pasture land where cattle grazed, and in the distance, mountains rose majestically against the sky. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered. "Cooper built it from nothing," Dr. Hayes said quietly. 10 years of hard work. As they approached the house, a lean, weathered man emerged from the barn. He watched their arrival with obvious wariness. One hand resting near his hip, Dr. Hayes raised a hand in greeting as he brought the buggy to a halt. "Afternoon, Sam. This is Miss Sarah Mitchell from Philadelphia." The man's eyebrows shot up in recognition. "Miss Mitchell, you were William Cooper's fiancée?" Sarah confirmed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've only just learned of his passing. Dr. Hayes was kind enough to bring me out to see the ranch anyway." Samuel Turner removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached hair and a deeply tanned face creased with recent grief. "I'm powerful sorry, ma'am. Mr. Cooper was looking forward to your arrival. Had us all busy getting the house ready these past few weeks." Sarah blinked back sudden tears. "Thank you for telling me that." Turner glanced uncertainly between Sarah and Dr. Hayes. "Would you like to see inside the house, ma'am? Mr. Cooper had the parlor fixed up real nice. Said you'd written about liking yellow flowers, so he had the walls painted to match." A sob escaped before Sarah could stop it. Dr. Hayes' hand moved as if to touch her arm, but retreated. Instead, he jumped down from the buggy and came around to her side, offering his hand to help her down. Sarah hesitated before placing her gloved hand in his much larger one. As she stepped down, her bad leg nearly buckled, and she clutched his arm to steady herself. If Dr. Hayes noticed her disability, his expression gave nothing away. "I'd like to see everything," Sarah said, composing herself, "if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all, ma'am," Turner assured her. For the next hour, Sarah walked through what would have been her home. The farmhouse was solidly built and surprisingly refined for a frontier dwelling. The parlor was indeed painted a soft yellow with curtains that matched. The kitchen was large and well-equipped. Upstairs, a master bedroom featured a handcrafted bed frame and a dressing table positioned before a window with a view of the mountains. "He ordered that special from Denver," Turner explained, nodding to the dressing table. "Said a lady would appreciate having a nice place to do her hair and such." In every room, Sarah saw evidence of William Cooper's preparations for a wife. Fresh paint, new furnishings, small touches that spoke of consideration and care. By the time they returned downstairs, Sarah's heart was heavy with grief for a man she had never met, but had come to know through his letters, and now his home. "What will happen to the ranch now?" she asked as they stood on the front porch. Turner sighed. "That's complicated, ma'am. Mr. Cooper had no family that anyone knows of. His lawyer in town, Mr. Jenkins, is trying to sort things out. For now, I'm keeping operations running, but without a clear owner." He shrugged helplessly. Sarah nodded, understanding the uncertainty. How strange that she and this ranch shared the same precarious fate, both left adrift by William Cooper's untimely death. As they prepared to leave, Turner disappeared into the house, returning with a small wooden box. "Mr. Cooper kept your letters in here, ma'am, and the photograph you sent. I expect you should have them now." Sarah accepted the box with trembling hands. "Thank you." The ride back to town was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Pine Creek, Dr. Hayes finally broke the silence. "What will you do now, Miss Mitchell?" It was the question Sarah had been turning over in her mind since hearing of William's death. I have limited funds, enough for perhaps 10 days of board. After that, she took a deep breath. I'll need employment. I'm educated. I can keep accounts, write correspondence. Perhaps there's a business in town that could use such skills. Dr. Hayes was quiet for a moment. It won't be easy. Frontier towns have limited opportunities for women, mostly teaching, laundering, cooking, or, he didn't finish the thought, or working in establishments like the Mountain Rose, Sarah supplied with more composure than she felt. His jaw tightened. That wasn't what I was suggesting. Of course not, forgive me. She stared at her gloved hands. I'm not afraid of hard work, Dr. Hayes, and I have nowhere else to go. As they reached the main street of Pine Creek, Dr. Hayes pulled the buggy to a stop, not in front of the boarding house as Sarah expected, but beside his own office. Miss Mitchell, I have a proposition for you. It's not what you came west for, but it might solve your immediate problem. Sarah regarded him warily. I'm listening. Dr. Hayes's blue eyes met hers directly. His expression was serious, his tone professional. I need someone to manage my accounts and correspondence. My previous nurse left 2 months ago to get married. The work is respectable. You'd have a small room at the back of the practice. The pay is $35 a month plus meals. Sarah blinked in surprise. You're offering me employment? You don't know anything about me. A small smile lifted one corner of his mouth. I know you had the courage to travel across the country to marry a man you'd never met. I know you insisted on seeing his ranch even after learning he was dead. And I know you have a practical mind. You're already planning how to support yourself rather than despairing of your situation. And my disability doesn't concern you? The question slipped out before Sarah could stop it. Dr. Hayes's gaze dropped briefly to her right leg, then returned to her face without a hint of pity. Why would it? You'll be keeping records, not running foot races. For the first time since arriving in Pine Creek, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. People will talk. A single woman living at a bachelor's medical practice. People always talk, Dr. Hayes replied with a shrug. But my reputation in this town is beyond reproach, and your position would be strictly professional. Anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me. Sarah considered his offer. Employment, independence, a purpose beyond being William Cooper's wife. I'll need to think about it, she said finally. Dr. Hayes nodded, taking up the reins again. Sleep on it. I'll call for your answer tomorrow. He guided the buggy toward the boarding house. For what it's worth, Miss Mitchell, I believe you would have made William Cooper a fine wife. As Sarah stepped down from the buggy outside the boarding house, she felt the weight of the small wooden box containing her letters to a dead man. For months she had poured her hopes and dreams into those pages, crafting a future that would now never exist. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was a different future waiting for her in this rugged Colorado town. Not the one she had journeyed so far to claim, but one she might forge for herself instead. Sarah spent a restless night at Mrs. Porter's boarding house. The wooden box containing her letters to William Cooper sat on the small dresser, a painful reminder of dreams that would never materialize. By morning, she had reached a decision. After breakfast, she approached Mrs. Porter in the kitchen. I'd like to inquire about extending my stay for another week, Sarah said. And I wonder if you might direct me to Mr. Jenkins, the lawyer Mr. Turner mentioned. The widow wiped her hands on her apron. Planning to contest Cooper's estate, are you? Can't say I blame you, making the journey all this way. No, Sarah replied firmly. I have no legal claim on Mr. Cooper's property, but I'd like to understand. What will happen to the ranch? And I need to consider Dr. Hayes's employment offer. Mrs. Porter's eyebrows shot up. Nathaniel Hayes offered you a position. Doing what exactly? Managing his accounts and correspondence, Sarah replied, lifting her chin slightly, in an entirely proper capacity, with lodging at his practice. The older woman studied her for a long moment. Hayes's practice may not be as comfortable as this boarding house, but the man himself has never given cause for scandal, pays his debts, treats the poorest miner same as the richest merchant, works himself half to death when illness sweeps through. She sighed. This isn't Philadelphia, Miss Mitchell. A woman in your situation can't afford to be overly particular. Sarah nodded. Thank you for your candor. An hour later, Sarah found herself in the tidy office of Harold Jenkins, attorney at law. The lawyer was a slender man with spectacles and a thoughtful demeanor, who listened carefully as Sarah explained her connection to William Cooper. I'm aware of Mr. Cooper's intention to marry, Jenkins confirmed. He consulted me about adding a wife to his property deed. He shuffled through some papers on his desk. However, without an actual marriage having taken place, you have no legal standing regarding his estate. I understand that, Sarah assured him. I'm merely curious about what will happen to the ranch. Mr. Cooper's letters spoke so passionately about the land and the home he built. Jenkins removed his spectacles, polishing them with a handkerchief. The situation is complicated. In the absence of a will or clear heirs, the property would normally escheat to the territory. However, Mr. Cooper had a substantial bank loan against the property for recent expansion of his herd. The bank may move to foreclose unless the loan is serviced. I see, Sarah said quietly, another piece of William Cooper's dream crumbling away. If you don't mind my asking, Miss Mitchell, what are your plans now? Colorado territory can be unforgiving for a woman alone. Sarah straightened her shoulders. Dr. Hayes has offered me employment as his office manager. I'm inclined to accept. If Jenkins was surprised, he concealed it well. Hayes is well respected in medical matters and business dealings. The position would provide you with independence, at least. As Sarah left the lawyer's office, she paused on the sidewalk, gazing down the street toward Dr. Hayes's practice. The morning sun glinted off its large front window. A sign painter was touching up the gold lettering on the facade, balancing precariously on a ladder. With determined steps, Sarah made her way toward the building. Her decision was made. Pride had no place in survival. The front door of Dr. Hayes's practice was unlocked, opening into a tidy waiting room with several chairs along the walls and a small desk positioned near the door. A corridor led to what she presumed was the examination room. The space was simple but spotlessly clean, with the faint smell of carbolic soap lingering in the air. "Hello," Sarah called, uncertain. The sound of footsteps preceded Dr. Hayes' appearance from the back room. He wore a crisp white shirt, with the sleeves rolled up, a stethoscope hanging around his neck. His expression brightened visibly when he saw her. "Miss Mitchell, I wasn't expecting you until later." "I saw no reason to delay my decision," Sarah replied. "If the position is still available, I'd like to accept." Relief spread across his features. "It is, and I'm glad to hear it." He gestured toward the small desk. "This would be your domain. You'd greet patients, maintain the appointment, ledger, handle correspondence, and manage the accounts." Sarah moved to examine the desk, finding a stack of papers in disarray and a ledger book with entries in a hasty, nearly illegible hand. "You've been managing these yourself?" He ran a hand through his dark hair, looking sheepish. "Attempting to, yes. Medicine is my strength, not bookkeeping." "I can see that," Sarah murmured, leafing through the chaotic records. "The living quarters are this way, if you'd like to see them," Dr. Hayes said, leading her through the examination room to a door at the back. The room beyond was small but neat, containing a narrow bed, a dresser, a small table with a single chair, and a wood stove for heat. A window looked out onto a small garden area. "It's not luxurious," he acknowledged, "but it's private. There's a washroom down the hall that we would share, though I've arranged a schedule for privacy. Meals would be taken together in my quarters, upstairs, or you're welcome to make other arrangements if that's not suitable. Sarah was surprised by the accommodations. They were better than she had expected, and certainly more private than the boarding house. "When would you like me to start?" "Tomorrow would be fine," Dr. Hayes replied. "The accounts are somewhat in disarray, as you've seen. I've been doing my best, but I'm afraid my patients have taken priority over paperwork. I'll bring my things from the boarding house this afternoon," Sarah decided. Dr. Hayes cleared his throat. "Miss Mitchell, there's something else you should know." Sarah paused, wondering what new complication awaited. "This practice serves everyone in Pine Creek and the surrounding area. Miners, ranchers, and townsfolk, even those from the Mountain Rose." He hesitated. "What I'm saying is that you may encounter people here that proper Philadelphia society would consider beneath notice. I treat them all the same, and I would expect you to do likewise." Sarah thought about the distinctions Philadelphia society made between the worthy and unworthy, how easily she herself had been relegated to the latter category due to her limp. "I understand, Dr. Hayes. I have no intention of bringing Eastern prejudices to your practice." He seemed pleased with her response. "Good. Then I'll expect you tomorrow morning." As Sarah returned to the boarding house to pack her few belongings, she felt a curious mix of emotions. The life she had imagined with William Cooper was gone, forever, but this new opportunity offered something she hadn't anticipated, the chance to be valued for her skills rather than judged for her disability. Mrs. Porter received the news of her departure with a mixture of concern and resignation. "Well, it's sensible, I suppose. Hayes is respected, even if he does have his peculiarities." "Peculiarities?" Sarah inquired. The widow waved a dismissive hand. "Just frontier ways that might seem strange to an Easterner. He doesn't turn anyone away, regardless of their ability to pay. Trades medical services for goods or labor when folks are short on cash. Some think him too soft-hearted for his own good." These didn't sound like flaws to Sarah, but she merely nodded and thanked Mrs. Porter for her hospitality. By dusk, Sarah was settled into her new quarters at Dr. Hayes's practice. The room was basic but clean, and she had arranged her few personal belongings to make it feel more like her own space. She could hear Dr. Hayes moving about upstairs, occasional footsteps creaking on the wooden floorboards. The reality of her new situation struck her forcefully. Just 4 days ago, she had stepped off the train, expecting to be met by her future husband. Now she was alone in a frontier town, employed by a doctor she barely knew, mourning a man she'd never met. As she unpacked the small wooden box containing her letters to William, Sarah felt a sense of closing one chapter of her life and beginning another. Tomorrow, she would start organizing Dr. Hayes's accounts. Tonight, she would allow herself one last evening of grief for the future that might have been. What she couldn't know was that Dr. Hayes had just returned from a private meeting with Harold Jenkins, the lawyer, where the subject had been the Cooper Ranch and a proposition that would soon intertwine their fates in ways neither could imagine. Sarah's first week as Dr. Hayes's office manager proved more challenging than she had anticipated. His previous record-keeping system, if it could be called that, consisted of hastily scribbled notes, jammed into folders, payments recorded on whatever scraps of paper were handy, and a ledger with entries that frequently included neither dates nor patient names. "I believe half your patients haven't paid in months," Sarah told him on her third day, surrounded by papers spread across her desk. Dr. Hayes looked up from the medical journal he was reading by the window. He seemed unsurprised. "Many can't afford to. The Baldwin mine laid off 20 men last month, and the drought last summer hit the smaller ranches hard." "But how do you manage your own expenses?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged. Those who can pay do. Sometimes. In cash, sometimes in goods. There's only one doctor in Pine Creek. I make enough to get by. He closed his journal and approached her desk. You're bringing remarkable order to my chaos, Miss Mitchell. Despite herself, Sarah felt a flush of pleasure at his approval. I'm only doing what you hired me for. With more skill than I expected, he admitted, studying the neat stacks of reorganized files. Most clerks I've encountered can follow a system, but struggle to create one where none exists. My father taught me, Sarah said, her voice warming at the memory. He believed women should understand business matters, even if society disagrees. Dr. Hayes smiled. Your father sounds like a sensible man. He was, Sarah agreed, then corrected herself. He is, though I doubt he'd approve of my current situation. A shadow crossed Dr. Hayes's face. I understand this position isn't what you imagined for yourself when you traveled west. Few things have been, Sarah replied softly. An awkward silence fell between them, broken by the arrival of a patient, a miner with a deep gash in his arm from a cave-in at the Baldwin operation. Sarah quickly cleared her desk as Dr. Hayes led the man to the examination room. She was learning that the rhythm of a frontier medical practice was unpredictable. Some days brought a steady stream of patients with minor ailments. Children with coughs, women seeking tonics for nervous conditions, men with work injuries. Other days might pass with only one or two visitors, followed by a middle-of-the-night emergency that required Dr. Hayes to ride for hours to reach a distant homestead. On those quiet days, Sarah discovered that Dr. Hayes was an avid reader with a small but impressive library in his upstairs quarters. When she commented on a medical text he'd left in the waiting room, he invited her to borrow whatever books interested her. My personal collection is modest, he told her, showing her the bookcase in his sitting room, but I subscribe to several medical journals and have connections who send me the latest publications from back east. Sarah was surprised by the breadth of his interests. Alongside medical texts were volumes of poetry, philosophy, and natural science. You studied at Harvard? She asked, noticing the seal on one of his medical diplomas hanging on the wall. Class of '78, he confirmed. Came west immediately after completing my residency in Boston. Why Colorado? Sarah couldn't help asking. A Harvard-educated physician could have established a lucrative practice in any eastern city. Dr. Hayes was quiet for a moment, his expression distant. I needed space and purpose. Eastern medicine is too often about social connections rather than healing. He gestured around the simple room. Here, I'm judged solely by whether I help people, not by which society functions I attend. There was something in his tone that suggested deeper reasons, but Sarah didn't press. Everyone in this territory seemed to carry private histories, reasons for leaving the comfort of civilization for the harsh beauty of the frontier. By the end of her first week, Sarah had completely reorganized the practice's filing system, created a proper appointment ledger, and begun the painstaking process of sorting through months of financial records. She had also begun to notice things about Dr. Hayes, his gentleness with frightened children, his respect for the elderly, his patience with those who couldn't pay. Sarah also observed his tireless work ethic. He rose before dawn each day and often read medical journals late into the night by lamplight. Some days he returned from house calls with exhaustion etched in the lines of his face, only to be called out again for another emergency. On Friday evening, as she was completing the day's records, Sarah heard raised voices from the examination room. A miner she recognized as one of the Baldwin foremen was arguing with Dr. Hayes. Those men need to be back at work by Monday, Doctor. The company can't afford these delays. And I can't afford to send men with lung fever back into a damp mine, Dr. Hayes replied, his normally calm voice edged with steel, unless you'd prefer to deal with a dozen dead miners instead of delayed production. The foreman stormed out, barely acknowledging Sarah as he passed. Dr. Hayes emerged moments later, his jaw tight with controlled anger. Baldwin mining values are more than men, he said, noticing Sarah's questioning look. They've had 3 fatal accidents this year already because they rushed safety improvements. Will there be trouble for you? Sarah asked, standing against a powerful company. Dr. Hayes's expression softened. They need me as much as I need them. When the next accident happens, and it will, I'm the only doctor within 50 miles. He sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. But it wears on a person, patching men up only to send them back to conditions that will eventually kill them. Sarah was struck by the burden he carried, not just the physical demands of frontier medicine, but the moral weight of these impossible situations. Why do you stay? She asked softly. Because someone has to, he replied simply. And I'd rather it be someone who remembers. These are men with families, not just bodies to be mended and returned to work. The following day brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah was alone in the office, Dr. Hayes having been called to a difficult birth. At a homestead several miles away, when the door opened to admit a striking woman in her 30s. Her dress, while fashionable, was modest enough for daytime, and her dark hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style. I'm looking for Dr. Hayes, the woman said, removing her gloves. He's been called away on an emergency, Sarah explained, rising from her desk. I'm Sarah Mitchell, his office manager. May I help you? Recognition dawned in the woman's eyes. The mail-order bride. Nathaniel mentioned you. She extended her hand. Victoria Reynolds. Most folks call me Tori. I manage the Mountain Rose. Sarah hesitated before shaking the offered hand. The Mountain Rose was clearly a saloon, possibly worse, and in Philadelphia, no respectable woman would associate with its proprietress. But this wasn't Philadelphia. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Reynolds, she said formally. The woman laughed, a rich, warm sound. It's Mrs. Reynolds, actually, though the Mister has been gone these 8 years, and you can drop that pinched look. The Mountain Rose is a respectable establishment by frontier standards. I apologize, Sarah said, embarrassed at being so transparent. I'm still adjusting to Western customs. Tori's expression softened. Nathaniel says you've brought order to this disaster he calls a medical practice. About time someone did. The man can set a broken bone like no one I've ever seen, but ask him to keep proper records and he's useless as a 3-legged horse in a race. The casual use of Dr. Hayes's first name caught Sarah's attention. You and Dr. Hayes are well acquainted? Something knowing flickered in Tori's eyes. We've been friends since he first came to Pine Creek 5 years ago. My late husband was his first patient here. Not that Nathaniel could do much for a man. With a bullet in his spine. She gazed around the waiting room. After Joseph died, Nathaniel helped me keep the Mountain Rose going when the miners wanted to run me out of town. Seems they thought a woman couldn't manage a saloon. Sarah was beginning to understand that Pine Creek operated by different rules than Eastern society. Relationships and alliances formed based on necessity and character rather than social standing. Was there something specific you needed from Dr. Hayes? Sarah asked, returning to her professional demeanor. One of my girls has a cough that won't quit. He usually comes by on Tuesdays to check on anyone who's ailing, but we missed him this week. Tori produced a small envelope. And his monthly payment for the loan. Loan? Sarah accepted the envelope, puzzled. For this building, Tori explained, gesturing around them. When Nathaniel wanted to expand the practice last year, the bank wouldn't lend to him. Too many patients who couldn't pay, they said. So I offered the funds. Just business, she added, seeing Sarah's expression. 5% interest, better than he'd get at the bank if they'd been willing. This was yet another surprise. The respectable Dr. Hayes was in debt to a saloon owner who casually referred to him by his first name and spoke of their friendship openly. "I'll make sure he receives this," Sarah said, placing the envelope in the payment ledger. Tori studied her with interest. "How are you finding Pine Creek, Miss Mitchell? Not quite what you expected when you set out from Philadelphia, I'd wager." "No," Sarah admitted. "Nothing has been what I expected." "That's the frontier for you," Tori said with a hint of a smile. "It takes what you thought you wanted and gives you what you never knew you needed instead." She moved toward the door, then paused. "You should come by the Mountain Rose sometime. Saturday nights we clear the tables for proper dancing. Folks from all over town attend, not just the miners and cowboys." Before Sarah could respond to this unexpected invitation, the door opened again, this time admitting Dr. Hayes. He looked exhausted, his clothes rumpled, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept. "Tori," he greeted the saloon owner with genuine warmth. "What brings you by?" "Lucy's cough and your monthly payment," she replied, her gaze assessing his haggard appearance. "Difficult birth?" "Breech. Both mother and baby pulled through, but it was a near thing." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I'll come see Lucy this evening." Tori nodded, then glanced between him and Sarah with a speculative expression. "Don't forget, we're expecting you Saturday night, Nathaniel. The whole town will be there for the spring dance." With that, she departed, leaving Sarah with 100 new questions about Dr. Nathaniel Hayes and his place in Pine Creek society. Dr. Hayes sank into one of the waiting room chairs, fatigue evident in every line of his body. "Mrs. Reynolds is a remarkable woman," he said, noting Sarah's thoughtful expression. "Her husband was shot in a dispute over mining claims. Instead of returning east, she took over his saloon and made it the most prosperous business in town." "She mentioned your friends," Sarah said carefully. "We are. Pine Creek isn't large enough for the luxury of avoiding people based on their occupation." He smiled slightly. "And Tori has done more good for this town than most, who claim greater respectability. She houses girls who would otherwise have no options, enforces rules of conduct that keep the miners in line, and has personally financed both the school roof and the church bell." Sarah was coming to understand that frontier morality operated on different principles than those she'd been raised with. Actions and character mattered more than appearances or occupations. "She invited me to the dance on Saturday," Sarah said. Dr. Hayes' expression brightened slightly despite his exhaustion. "You should attend. It would be a good way to meet more of the townspeople." He hesitated. "I usually make an appearance myself, though I'm not much of a dancer." The thought of a social gathering filled Sarah with equal parts anticipation and dread. In Philadelphia, such events had been exercises in humiliation, with young men avoiding asking her to dance and matrons whispering behind their fans about poor Sarah Mitchell and her unfortunate condition. "I don't dance, Dr. Hayes," she said quietly. "My leg makes it difficult." He studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful rather than pitying. Perhaps in Philadelphia that was true. But you might find Pine Creek has different standards for what constitutes dancing. He rose from his chair. "Consider it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to clean up before my next patient arrives." That evening, as Sarah completed the day's records and prepared for bed, she found herself contemplating the Mountain Rose's spring dance. The thought of entering a social gathering where everyone would notice her limp filled her with familiar dread. Yet Dr. Hayes' words lingered in her mind, along with the growing recognition that Pine Creek operated by different rules than those she'd known all her life. Perhaps, just perhaps, this frontier town might offer not just employment and independence, but also acceptance she had never found in the society ballrooms of Philadelphia. Saturday dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through Sarah's small window. She had risen early to complete the week's final accounting tasks, wanting to leave Dr. Hayes's records impeccable before taking Sunday as her day of rest. As she worked, she could hear him moving about upstairs, the floorboards creaking as he prepared for his morning rounds. When he appeared downstairs, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt, Sarah was struck again by the contrast between the frontier physician and the Harvard-educated gentleman. In his professional attire, with his dark hair neatly combed, Nathaniel Hayes cut an impressive figure, one that would not have been out of place in Philadelphia's finest homes. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell," he greeted her. "You're at the accounts early today." "I wanted to finish before Sunday," she explained. "Have you decided about the Hansen account? They've made no payment in 3 months." Dr. Hayes poured himself coffee from the pot that Sarah had prepared. "Mrs. Hansen brings fresh eggs and milk weekly. That's payment enough while her husband recovers from his mining accident." Sarah made a notation in the ledger. She was learning that frontier economics operated on a complex system of barter, credit, and goodwill that would have baffled Philadelphia's bankers. And the Murphy family? Their youngest is still fighting that fever. Let's not worry them about payment until the child is well. He sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim of the cup. "Have you decided about the dance this evening?" Sarah hesitated. She had spent half the night considering the invitation, weighing her ingrained fears against her growing desire to become part of this community. "I'm undecided. I have nothing appropriate to wear for such an occasion." It was a deflection, rather than the true reason, and Dr. Hayes's knowing look suggested he recognized it as such. "Mrs. Bennett at the general store keeps a selection of ready-made dresses, nothing fancy by Eastern standards, but suitable for a frontier gathering." He set down his cup. "If I may be so bold, Miss Mitchell, I think you would enjoy the experience. Pine Creek social gatherings bear little resemblance to Philadelphia ballrooms." Sarah adjusted the papers on her desk, avoiding his gaze. "Perhaps I will consider it." Dr. Hayes collected his medical bag. "I'll be checking on the Cooper's new baby, and then stopping by the Wallace homestead. Their youngest has a rash. Want to monitor. I should return by mid-afternoon." He paused at the door. "The dance begins at 7. I usually arrive around 8, after making evening rounds at the Mountain Rose to check on any ailing girls." After he left, Sarah tried to focus on the accounts, but her mind kept returning to the prospect of the dance. In Philadelphia, such events had been exercises in humiliation, sitting with the chaperones while other young women danced, enduring pitying glances, watching younger sisters receive attention she never would. The thought of voluntarily putting herself in a similar position here made her stomach clench with anxiety. Yet Dr. Hayes had suggested Pine Creek might be different, and Sarah had already discovered that many Eastern assumptions had proved false. In this frontier town, by noon, her curiosity had overcome her fear. Sarah locked the office and walked to Bennett's general store. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully as she entered, announcing her presence to the plump, friendly woman. Arranging fabric bolts behind the counter, "Miss Mitchell, what a pleasure," Mrs. Bennett greeted her. "We've all been hearing such good things about your work organizing Dr. Hayes's practice. That man may be a miracle worker with medicine, but his bookkeeping was a disaster." Sarah smiled, already growing accustomed to the frontier habit of speaking plainly. "Dr. Hayes mentioned you might have dresses suitable for this evening's gathering at the Mountain Rose." Mrs. Bennett's face brightened. "Indeed I do. Just got a shipment from Denver last week." She came around the counter, appraising Sarah with a practiced eye. "Let me show you what might suit." The selection was modest by Philadelphia standards, perhaps a dozen ready-made dresses in practical colors and simple cuts. But Mrs. Bennet handled each garment with the same reverence a Fifth Avenue modiste might show a Worth gown. "This blue would complement your coloring," she suggested, holding up a dress of medium blue cotton with a lace collar and cuffs. Simple, enough for a frontier dance, but with enough detail to look festive. Sarah examined the garment. It was well made, if not fashionable by Eastern standards, with a slightly fuller skirt than current Philadelphia styles favored. But she realized the fuller cut might actually help disguise her uneven gait when walking. "May I try it?" she asked. Mrs. Bennet led her to a curtained alcove at the back of the store. The dress fit reasonably well, needing only minor adjustments at the waist, which Mrs. Bennet promised to complete within the hour. $4 even, she told Sarah when she emerged. A fair price for Denver goods. It was more than Sarah had planned to spend, but she found herself nodding agreement. If she was going to face her fears tonight, she would do so looking her best. While Mrs. Bennet made the alterations, Sarah browsed the store, marveling at the variety of goods available in this frontier outpost. Alongside practical items like tools, fabric, and preserved foods, she found small luxuries, ribbons from New York, perfumes from France, even chocolate from Boston. "We get new shipments monthly," Mrs. Bennet explained, noticing her interest. "My husband insists that just because folks choose to live on the frontier doesn't mean they should be denied civilization's comforts." As Sarah waited, other customers entered, each greeting her by name despite her short time in town. News traveled quickly in Pine Creek, and everyone seemed to know she was Cooper's mail-order bride who now works for Dr. Hayes. Yet, she detected no judgment in their manner, only curiosity and cautious welcome. By the time Sarah returned to her room behind the doctor's office, the afternoon was waning. She had just enough time to wash her hair and arrange it more carefully than usual before changing into her new dress. Looking in the small mirror above her washstand, Sarah barely recognized herself. The blue fabric brightened her complexion, and the fuller skirt moved gracefully even with her uneven steps. She was just pinning a small brooch, one of the few pieces of jewelry she'd brought west, to her collar when she heard Dr. Hayes return. His footsteps moved from the front office upstairs to his quarters, then back down again. When Sarah emerged from her room, she found him in the waiting area, dressed in what was clearly his best suit, dark wool, well cut if not fashionable, with a crisp white shirt and blue necktie. He turned at the sound of her door, and something in his expression made Sarah's cheeks warm. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying a note she hadn't heard before. "You look lovely." "Thank you," she replied, smoothing her skirt nervously. Mrs. Bennet was most helpful. "Blue suits you." His gaze was admiring but respectful. "Shall we?" Sarah hesitated. "I should warn you, Dr. Hayes. I won't be able to dance. My leg—" "I understand," he interrupted gently. "There's no obligation. Many folks attend simply to enjoy the music and company. And please, outside of office hours, I'd be honored if you'd call me Nathaniel." The familiar address startled her, but Sarah found she didn't mind. "Then you must call me Sarah, at least when we're not before patients." The walk to the Mountain Rose took less than 10 minutes, but it gave Sarah time to observe Pine Creek in its Saturday evening splendor. Shops were closed, but lanterns hung from every porch, casting warm pools of light onto the wooden sidewalks. People nodded greetings as they passed, couples and families all heading in the same direction. The Mountain Rose itself was ablaze with light, its windows glowing invitingly against the darkening sky. As they approached, Sarah felt her anxiety return. She slowed her pace, and Nathaniel immediately adjusted his steps to match hers. "Second, thoughts?" he asked perceptively. "I haven't attended a social gathering since before my accident," she admitted. "In Philadelphia they became uncomfortable experiences." His expression darkened briefly. Eastern society can be cruel. In its pursuit of perfection, he offered his arm. Pine Creek values different qualities. You might be surprised. Taking a deep breath, Sarah placed her hand on his arm and allowed him to escort her inside. The Mountain Rose's transformation astounded her. Gone was any trace of a frontier saloon. The main room had been cleared of its usual tables to create a spacious dance floor. Benches and chairs lined the walls for those wishing to observe. A small stage at one end held 3 musicians, a fiddler, a guitarist, and a piano player, who were tuning their instruments. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm golden glow over the gathering crowd. Most surprising was the mix of attendees. Respectable townswomen stood alongside the Mountain Rose's regular girls, distinguishable only by subtle differences in dress style. Miners in clean but worn clothes chatted with merchants in better suits. Children darted between adults, laughing and playing before the music began. "Dr. Hayes!" Several voices called greetings as they entered. Nathaniel was clearly well-liked, receiving nods from the men and warm smiles from the women. Sarah noticed a few curious glances her way, but none of the pitying looks she'd grown accustomed. 2 in Philadelphia. "Nathaniel, you made it!" Tory Reynolds approached, resplendent in a burgundy dress more fashionable than Sarah had expected. "And Miss Mitchell, I'm delighted you decided to join us." She surveyed Sarah's blue dress approvingly. "Lovely choice. Bennett's new shipment, isn't it?" "Yes, Mrs. Reynolds. Thank you for the invitation." "It's Tory, please. Only the miners. Wives call me Mrs. Reynolds, and that's only because it makes them feel better about their husbands spending time here." She winked. "Come, let me introduce you to some folks worth knowing." The next half hour passed in a whirl of introductions. Sarah met the mayor and his wife, the schoolteacher, the telegraph operator, and numerous merchants and their families. Each greeted her with frontier directness, expressing sympathy about William Cooper while welcoming her to Pine Creek. Several mentioned how pleased they were that Dr. Hayes had found competent help. "Your organization of the doctor's records has already improved his efficiency," the mayor's wife told her. "Last month he kept my Henry waiting 2 hours because he couldn't find his treatment records. This week everything was ready when we arrived. The town thanks you." As the musicians struck up the first dance, a lively reel, couples moved onto the floor. Sarah found herself seated on a bench against the wall with Nathaniel beside her. He declined several invitations to dance from Mountain Rose girls, choosing instead to remain at her side, explaining the various Pine Creek personalities and their interconnections. "The tall man by the punch bowl is Samuel Jenkins, owns the lumber mill. His wife beside him runs the town's only lending library from their front parlor. The young couple dancing near the stage are newlyweds. He's the blacksmith's apprentice. She's the minister's daughter. Caused quite a stir when they courted, but they're well matched." Sarah found herself relaxing, enjoying the music and spectacle without the pressure to participate. When the musicians shifted to a waltz, her tension returned. Memories of Philadelphia ballrooms, where she'd been conspicuously unpartnered, flooding back. "Would you like some punch?" Nathaniel asked, sensing her discomfort. Before she could answer, a burly, bearded man in clean miner's clothes approached and stopped before them. He removed his hat, revealing prematurely grey hair. "Evening, Doc," he said, nodding respectfully to Nathaniel before turning to Sarah. "Miss Mitchell, I'm Jacob Miller, foreman at the Baldwin mine. I was wondering if you might honor me with this dance." Sarah froze, unprepared for the invitation. "That's very kind, Mr. Miller, but I don't dance." The miner smiled gently. "Begging your pardon, miss, but everyone dances at Pine Creek gatherings. Some just move a bit differently than others." He gestured to the dance floor, where Sarah noticed for the first time an elderly man with a cane swaying in place with his wife, and a young woman with a pronounced spinal curve being carefully guided by her partner. "Jacob lost 3 fingers in a mining accident 5 years ago," Nathaniel said quietly. "He didn't dance for a year afterward, until Tori personally dragged him onto the floor." Sarah looked from Nathaniel to the miner, whose honest face showed no pity, only genuine invitation. Something inside her, a wall built of Philadelphia rejections and social humiliations, began to crumble. "I may step on your feet, Mr. Miller," she warned, rising from her seat. The miner's face split into a broad grin. "I've got 9 toes left, miss. I reckon I can spare a few." As Jacob led her onto the floor, Sarah felt dozens of eyes upon her. But for the first time in her adult life, she detected no judgment in those gazes, only the friendly curiosity of a community welcoming a newcomer. The waltz began, and Jacob proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer despite his missing fingers. He kept a respectful distance while providing steady support, accommodating her uneven gait without drawing attention to it. "The whole town's been wondering about you," he said conversationally as they turned. "Not every day a Philadelphia lady shows up in Pine Creek. I imagine my arrival caused quite a stir, given the circumstances," Sarah replied, concentrating on her steps. Jacob nodded sympathetically. Cooper was a good man, private sort but fair in his dealings. His passing was a loss to the community. He guided her through a turn, his strong hand at her waist providing security. "But folks are pleased you've stayed on. Doc Hayes needs someone sensible to keep him organized. Man works himself half to death, caring for others without a thought for himself." Sarah glanced toward Nathaniel, who was watching them from his seat, an unreadable expression on his face. "He seems very dedicated to his patients." "Dedicated?" Jacob chuckled. "When typhoid swept through the miners' camp last winter, he didn't sleep for 4 days straight. Saved 16 men, including my youngest brother." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "There's not a family in Pine Creek he hasn't helped one way or another. Most don't have the means to pay properly, but he never turns anyone away." The music drew to a close, and Jacob led her back to her seat with a courtly bow that would have done credit to a Philadelphia gentleman. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Mitchell." As he departed, Sarah turned to find Nathaniel regarding her with a warm smile. "You dance beautifully," he said softly. "Hardly," she replied, though pleasure at the compliment flooded through her. "But Mr. Miller was kind enough to make it seem so. That's Jacob's way. He's taught many a self-conscious newcomer that Pine Creek values substance over appearance." Nathaniel hesitated, then offered his hand. "The next dance is another waltz. Would you do me the honor?" Sarah's heart quickened. Dancing with the kind miner had been one thing, but the prospect of standing so close to Nathaniel Hayes, whose opinion had come to matter more than she cared to admit, made her palms dampen. With nervousness, "I would like that," she heard herself say. As he led her onto the floor, Sarah was acutely aware of the differences between Nathaniel and Jacob. Where the miner had been solid and practical in his movements, Nathaniel's hand at her waist was light but sure, his posture elegant without being stiff. He held her at a proper distance, yet she felt a connection between them that transcended physical proximity. "You've surprised everyone," he murmured as they began to move with the music. When word spread that Cooper's mail-order bride was staying on as my assistant, the speculation was considerable. "What sort of speculation?" Sarah asked, finding her steps coming more naturally now. His smile held a hint of mischief. "Some thought you'd flee back east at the first opportunity. Others wagered you'd accept the first proposal from any man with a secure living." His expression grew more serious. None expected you to establish yourself independently, creating your own place in Pine Creek through competence and character. I had few options, Sarah reminded him, though his words warmed her. You had one obvious option: return to Philadelphia and the security of your family home. Many would have chosen that path. His blue eyes held hers. It takes courage to remain in a strange place, building a new life from nothing. As they glided across the floor, Sarah realized that for these few minutes she had forgotten to be self-conscious about her limp. Nathaniel guided her so skillfully that her uneven steps became part of their shared rhythm rather than an impediment to overcome. When the music ended, she was breathless, not from exertion, but from the intensity of the connection she'd felt. Nathaniel seemed similarly affected. His usual professional reserve softened into something more personal. The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant blur. Sarah danced twice more, once with the mayor and once with Samuel Turner from the Cooper Ranch, who had come to town for supplies and stayed for the gathering. Between dances, she sat with Nathaniel or Tori, observing the lively community around her. By the time they walked back to the doctor's office under a canopy of stars, Sarah felt transformed. For the first time since childhood, she had participated in a social event without feeling like an object of pity or an awkward burden. "Thank you," she said as they reached the office door. "This evening was unexpected." Nathaniel's expression was soft in the moonlight. Pine Creek has its rough edges, but one thing it does well is allowing people to define themselves by their actions rather than their circumstances. He unlocked the door, holding it open for her. "I'm glad you came tonight, Sarah." "So am I." She paused in the doorway, finding herself reluctant to end the evening. "I've never experienced anything quite like it." "The Mountain Roses dances are a Pine Creek institution," he said, lighting a lamp in the waiting room. "Tori started them 5 years ago as a way to civilize the miners and give the respectable townswomen a reason to acknowledge the saloon. Girls as part of the community. It worked better than anyone expected." As Sarah prepared for bed that night, her mind kept returning to the waltz with Nathaniel, the secure feeling of his hand at her waist, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. It was foolish to read too much into simple kindness, she reminded herself. Dr. Hayes was a gentleman who would naturally treat any woman in his employ with respect and consideration. Yet as she drifted towards sleep, Sarah couldn't help wondering if perhaps there might be something more growing between them. Not the hasty arrangement she'd tried to create with William Cooper, but something deeper, built on genuine knowledge of each other's character. Sunday morning found Sarah attending services at Pine Creek's small church. She had gone alone, as Nathaniel had been called out before dawn to assist with a difficult birth at a distant homestead. The church was simple but well-maintained, its wooden pews filled with a cross-section of the community, from the mayor and his wife to miners and their families. Reverend Sullivan, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a practical manner, preached a sermon on finding divine purpose in unexpected circumstances. Sarah couldn't help feeling it was particularly applicable to her situation. After the service, she was approached by several women who had been at the dance, each offering friendly conversation and invitations to various community gatherings. A quilting circle, a literary society, even a women's committee planning the town's 4th of July celebrations. "We meet at my home Tuesday afternoons," Mrs. Jenkins, the lumber mill owner's wife, told her when describing the literary society. "Nothing pretentious, just discussion of whatever books we've managed to acquire. Your Eastern perspective would be most welcome." Sarah accepted the invitations graciously, marveling at how quickly Pine Creek was assimilating her into its social fabric. In just 2 weeks, she had gone from abandoned bride to contributing community member, with a respectable position and growing social connections. As she walked back to the doctor's office after church, Sarah's thoughts turned to William Cooper. Would she have found the same acceptance as his wife? Would their marriage have grown into the partnership she had hoped for in her letters? These questions would forever remain unanswered, yet she found herself grateful for the path her life had taken, unexpected though it was. Nathaniel returned late Sunday afternoon, tired but pleased with the successful birth. A healthy boy, 8 pounds if he's an ounce, he reported, settling into a chair in the small back garden where Sarah was enjoying the spring sunshine. That makes 17 children I've delivered in Pine Creek, all thriving. You must take great satisfaction in your work, Sarah observed, noting the quiet pride in his voice despite his exhaustion. Most days, he agreed, though some are harder than others. He studied her thoughtfully. How was church? Enlightening, she replied. Reverend Sullivan is quite different from Philadelphia ministers. Nathaniel chuckled. Sullivan was a trapper before he found his calling. Knows more about surviving wilderness winters than theological doctrine, but that makes him well suited to frontier faith. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, enjoying the late afternoon sun. Then Nathaniel straightened, his expression becoming more serious. Sarah, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you. He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. It concerns the Cooper Ranch. Sarah's attention sharpened. Has Mr. Jenkins made progress with the legal matters? In a manner of speaking, Nathaniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The bank is moving to foreclose, despite Turner's best efforts to keep operations running. Without clear ownership, they see too much risk in maintaining the loan. Sarah felt a pang of sadness. William Cooper had built something remarkable from nothing, and to see it lost to financial technicalities seemed a poor testament to his years of labor. That's unfortunate, she said. Mr. Turner mentioned several hands will lose their livelihoods if the ranch changes hands. Yes. Nathaniel's gaze was direct now. Which is why I've been discussing a possible solution with Jenkins. I'm considering purchasing the property. This was unexpected. You wish to become a rancher, Doctor? A smile flickered across his face. Not exactly. I have no interest in abandoning medicine, but I have some savings, enough to satisfy the bank and maintain operations with Turner as foreman. He paused. The thing is, Sarah, I know nothing about running such an enterprise. The medical practice keeps me fully occupied. I'm not sure how I can help, Sarah said, puzzled by the direction of the conversation. Nathaniel took a deep breath. I'm proposing a partnership. I have the capital to purchase the property and maintain operations. You have the head for figures and the education to help manage it properly. His blue eyes held hers. We could preserve Cooper's legacy while creating a secure investment for both our futures. Sarah stared at him, struggling to process this unexpected proposal. You hardly know me, Dr. Hayes. Why would you offer such an opportunity? Nathaniel, please, he corrected gently, and I know enough. I've seen how efficiently you've organized my chaotic practice in just 2 weeks. I've observed your practical approach to challenges and your determination to create a place for yourself here. His voice softened. William Cooper chose well when he asked you to share his life here. His death shouldn't negate the contribution you might have made to the ranch he built. The reference to William brought a fresh pang of complicated emotions. This would be his legacy, wouldn't it? The land he loved, the home he built, preserved rather than lost to the bank. Yes, Nathaniel agreed, but I'm not offering charity, Sarah. This would be a business arrangement with contracts drawn up properly by Jenkins. You would earn your ownership share through work and management. The practice would remain my primary focus, but the ranch could provide security for both our futures. As the setting sun cast long shadows across the small garden, Sarah considered how dramatically her circumstances had changed in just 2 weeks. From abandoned bride to potential ranch owner, it was almost too much to comprehend. I'll need time "To consider your offer," she said finally. Nathaniel nodded, seemingly pleased rather than disappointed by her caution. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands." That night, as Sarah prepared for bed, she found herself at a crossroads she could never have anticipated when she boarded the train in Philadelphia. Nathaniel Hayes' proposition offered financial security and purpose beyond her role at the medical practice. Yet it would bind their lives together in ways that extended beyond their current employer-employee relationship. And there was the question that Sarah hardly dared consider, the growing awareness that her feelings toward the doctor had already evolved beyond professional respect into something warmer and more personal. Would a business partnership complicate those feelings or create space for them to develop naturally? The answer didn't come that night, but as Sarah drifted towards sleep, she realized that for the first time since arriving in Pine Creek, she was thinking not of what she had lost, but of what she might build, a future defined not by William Cooper's absence, but by her own choices and capabilities. 2 weeks after Nathaniel's business proposition, Sarah found herself standing on the porch of what was now officially the Hayes and Mitchell Ranch. The contracts had been signed yesterday in Mr. Jenkins's office, establishing their partnership with clear terms that protected both their interests. The summer air carried a fresh sweetness, the mountains in the distance still capped with snow despite the season. Sarah pulled her shawl closer around her shoulders as she gazed out over the pastures where the cattle grazed. Samuel Turner had proved invaluable during the transition, explaining the operation in detail and introducing Sarah to the ranch hands, most of whom had chosen to stay on under the new ownership. "Coffee, Mom?" Turner appeared at her elbow, offering a steaming mug. "Thank you, Sam." Sarah accepted gratefully, warming her hands around the cup. The men seemed to be adjusting well to the change. Turner nodded. "They're good workers. Most were loyal to the land more than to Mr. Cooper specifically." He hesitated. "Begging your pardon, but they're curious about your arrangement with Dr. Hayes. Some are wondering if there's more to it than business." Sarah had anticipated this. Frontier communities thrived on gossip, and her unusual situation provided ample fodder. "You can assure them it's strictly a business partnership. Dr. Hayes recognized my skills with numbers and management. Nothing more." Even as she spoke the words, Sarah questioned their complete truth. The dance they had shared, the respect. In Nathaniel's eyes, when he proposed their partnership, these suggested complexities beyond mere business. "Dr. Hayes is coming up the road," Turner noted, pointing to a figure on horseback approaching from town. Sarah's heart quickened inexplicably. Nathaniel had been dividing his time between the ranch and his medical practice, leaving his new assistant, a young man fresh from medical school in Denver, to handle routine cases while he focused on learning the cattle business. His dedication to making their partnership succeed had impressed Sarah considerably. "I'll leave you to your meeting," Turner said with a knowing smile that Sarah chose to ignore. Nathaniel dismounted at the hitching post, removing his hat as he climbed the porch steps. The weeks of outdoor work had added color to his face, making his blue eyes seem even more striking against his sun-browned skin. "Good morning, Sarah. How are the accounts looking?" She smiled at his predictable first question, promising, "If cattle prices hold through fall, we should be able to pay down a significant portion of the banknote." "Excellent." He accepted the coffee she poured from the pot Turner had left. "And how are you finding ranch life? Different from bookkeeping at a medical practice, I imagine." "Quieter," Sarah admitted, "though I miss watching you with your patience. You have a gift for putting people at ease." Nathaniel's laugh was warm. "My new assistant lacks your efficiency. He asked me yesterday where you kept the patient records for the Wilsons. Seemed shocked to discover there was actually a filing system." The easy camaraderie that had developed between them over the past weeks made these morning meetings the highlight of Sarah's day. Nathaniel treated her as a true partner, valuing her opinions and deferring to her expertise with finances. In Dai's own turn, she respected his practical knowledge and business instincts. "I've been thinking about expansion," Nathaniel said, settling into the chair beside hers. "The north pasture could support another 100 head if we improve the water access." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I've been reviewing the maps. If we divert part of the creek, we could—" Her words were interrupted by the arrival of a wagon coming fast up the drive. Sarah recognized Mrs. Bennet from the general store at the Rains, driving with unusual haste. Nathaniel rose, concern etching his features. Something's wrong. They met Mrs. Bennet as she pulled the wagon to a stop. "Dr. Hayes, Miss Mitchell," she called, breathless with urgency. "There's been an accident in town. The scaffolding at the new church bell tower collapsed during construction. 3 men are badly hurt, and young Tommy Parker is trapped underneath. They need you immediately." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth in shock. Nathaniel was already moving, calling for his horse to be brought back. "I'll come with you," Sarah decided instantly. "You may need assistance." "No need for both of us to go," Nathaniel began, but Sarah cut him off. "Tommy Parker is 10 years old, Nathaniel. His mother will be frantic. You'll need someone to manage the situation while you tend to the injured." The ride to town was tense and silent, the wagon rattling over the rutted road at dangerous speed. Upon reaching Pine Creek, they headed straight for the church where a crowd had gathered around the partially constructed bell tower. Scaffolding lay splintered on the ground, and men were working frantically to lift heavy wooden beams. Nathaniel leapt from his horse before it had fully stopped, medical bag in hand. "Where are the injured?" "Reverend Sullivan's office," someone called. "The boy's still trapped, though." Sarah followed Nathaniel into the small church office where 3 men lay on hastily arranged pallets. Blood soaked through makeshift bandages, and their groans filled the small space. Mrs. Parker knelt beside them, her face white with terror for her son. "Sarah, I need clean water, towels, and my surgical kit from the bag," Nathaniel instructed, his voice calm but authoritative as he knelt beside the most seriously injured man. "And someone needs to ride to my office. Tell Davis to bring all the laudanum and bandages we have." For the next hour, Sarah worked alongside Nathaniel, providing the supplies he needed, helping to hold men steady as he set broken bones, and offering what comfort she could to the frantic mother. Outside, the rescue efforts continued, the sounds of shouting and shifting timber providing a grim backdrop to their work. A cheer went up from the crowd, followed by a call for the doctor. "They've reached the boy!" someone shouted through the door. "Go," Sarah told Nathaniel, who was finishing splinting a miner's broken arm. "I can manage here." Without hesitation, Nathaniel rushed outside. Through the window, Sarah watched as he dropped to his knees beside the small, still form they had, extracted from the rubble. Even from a distance, she could see the blood matting the child's fair hair and the unnatural angle of his leg. The next hours blurred together in a haze of blood, bandages, and quiet instructions. Nathaniel worked tirelessly, moving between the injured men and the desperately hurt child. Sarah became his shadow, anticipating his needs, managing the growing crowd of concerned townsfolk, and keeping a steady stream of supplies coming from his practice. By evening, the crisis had stabilized somewhat. The 3 men would recover, though one would likely walk with a limp for the rest of his life. Tommy Parker's condition remained grave. Nathaniel had relocated him to the medical practice where he could monitor him through the night. "Go back to the ranch," Nathaniel told Sarah as dusk fell. "There's nothing more you can do here, and you look exhausted." "I'm staying," she replied firmly. "You can't manage the boy and the other patients alone. Davis has his hands full with the miners." Nathaniel looked as if he might argue, then simply nodded, the gratitude in his eyes speaking volumes. Sarah spent the night in a chair beside Tommy Parker's bed, watching as Nathaniel checked the boy's pulse, listened to his breathing, and monitored the head injury for signs of improvement or decline. Mrs. Parker had finally succumbed to exhaustion and slept fitfully on a cot in the corner. "His color's better," Sarah whispered as dawn light began to filter through the window. Nathaniel nodded, fatigue etched in every line of his face. "The next few hours will tell. If he wakes, his chances improve dramatically." As if hearing them, the boy's eyelids fluttered. His small hand, which Sarah had been holding throughout the night, tightened slightly around her fingers. "Tommy?" Nathaniel leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Can you hear me, son?" The child's eyes opened, confusion evident in his gaze. "Mama?" he whispered. Mrs. Parker was instantly awake, rushing to her son's side. "I'm here, Tommy. You're safe." As the mother embraced her child, Sarah felt Nathaniel's hand come to rest on her shoulder, a gesture of shared relief and triumph. The simple touch held more meaning than words could express. Acknowledgement of her assistance, appreciation for her steadiness throughout the crisis, recognition of their partnership beyond business matters. "You should rest now," Sarah told him quietly. "I'll stay with them while you sleep for a few hours." Nathaniel looked ready to protest, but his exhaustion was evident. "Wake me if there's any change," he conceded. After he left, Sarah remained with Mrs. Parker and Tommy, helping the boy sip water and reassuring the mother that the worst had passed. Through the window, she could see Pine Creek coming to life as dawn brightened into morning. Men were already at the church, clearing debris and examining what remained of the bell tower. This crisis had shown her another side of frontier life, the immediacy of danger and the communal response to tragedy. In Philadelphia, accidents were handled by proper authorities, victims whisked away to hospitals. Here, everyone participated in rescue and recovery, from the miners who had dug through rubble to the saloon girls who had torn up clean sheets for bandages. By midday, Tommy's condition had improved enough that Sarah felt comfortable leaving him in his mother's care. She made her way upstairs to check on Nathaniel, finding him sprawled fully clothed across his bed, still wearing his blood-stained shirt. He had managed to remove only his boots before exhaustion had claimed him. Sarah stood in the doorway, studying the sleeping physician. In repose, his face seemed younger, the lines of responsibility temporarily eased. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and his steady breathing indicated the deep sleep of complete fatigue. She had just turned to leave when his voice, rough with sleep, stopped her. "Sarah?" "I didn't mean to wake you," she said softly, turning back. "Tommy is doing well. His fever is down, and he's taken some broth." Nathaniel sat up, running, a hand through his disheveled hair. "What time is it?" "Just past noon. You've slept less than 4 hours." "Too much to do," he muttered, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "The patients are stable, the town is managing the cleanup, and Davis is handling routine cases," Sarah informed him firmly. "You need rest, or you'll be useless to everyone." A smile touched his lips despite his exhaustion. "You sound like a doctor's wife, not a business partner." The words hung in the air between them, unintentionally revealing. Sarah felt color rising in her cheeks, but she held his gaze steadily. "I sound like someone who cares about your well-being, Nathaniel. Rest a few more hours. I'll wake you if you're needed." His expression softened. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." She left him to sleep and returned to the main floor of the practice, where Mrs. Parker was gently singing to her drowsy son. The crisis was passing, but its effects lingered in Sarah's mind. She had seen Nathaniel at his most elementally himself during these hours, competent, compassionate, tireless in service to others. And she had discovered her own strength in supporting him, finding calm purpose amidst chaos. By evening, Tommy was well enough that his father could stay with him, allowing Mrs. Parker to return home to tend to her other children. Nathaniel, rested and in clean clothes, had checked his patients and pronounced himself cautiously optimistic about all their recoveries. "You should go back to the ranch," he told Sarah as they shared a simple meal in his quarters. "Turner will be wondering what's happened." "I sent word with Mrs. Bennett this morning," she replied, "and I'd rather stay another night in case Tommy takes a turn." Nathaniel studied her across the table, his expression thoughtful. "You've surprised me again, Sarah Mitchell." "How so?" "Yesterday, you were as steady as any trained nurse I've ever worked with. No hesitation, no squeamishness, just practical support exactly when needed." He leaned forward slightly. "It made me wonder why you chose to answer a stranger's advertisement. For a wife, rather than pursue nursing or another profession in Philadelphia. You clearly have the temperament for crisis." Sarah considered his question carefully. No one had ever asked her why she had made such a desperate choice. Few respectable professions are open to women in Philadelphia, even fewer to women with physical imperfections, she said finally. "My options were to remain dependent on my parents or to find a husband willing to overlook my limp. When the first seemed increasingly permanent and the second increasingly unlikely, William Cooper's advertisement offered a third path." "I see." Nathaniel's gaze was compassionate without being pitying. "And now, how do you find your path in Pine Creek?" Sarah met his eyes directly. "Unexpectedly liberating," she admitted. "Here, my competence matters more than my imperfection. I found purpose through our partnership, both at the practice and now the ranch." Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, a softening that made Sarah's heart beat faster. "The partnership has benefited me equally," he said quietly. "Not just in practical terms, though your organizational skills have transformed my professional life, but having someone who shares my vision, who understands the balance between service and sustainability." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers in a gesture that felt both comforting and thrilling. "I didn't realize how solitary my life had become until you arrived in Pine Creek, Sarah." The moment stretched between them, waited, with unspoken possibilities. Then a call from the examination room, Tommy asking for the doctor, broke the spell. Nathaniel withdrew his hand reluctantly and rose to check on his patient. Sarah remained at the table, her hand still warm where his had rested, her mind racing with implications. Was this simply the natural closeness that developed between partners in challenging circumstances, or was it the beginning of something deeper? 2 days later, with Tommy Parker safely recovering and the ranch running smoothly under Turner's temporary management, Sarah returned to her regular duties. But something had changed. The easy professional rapport she had shared with Nathaniel now carried an undercurrent of awareness, a mutual recognition that their connection had deepened during the crisis. They continued their routine, Sarah managing the practice records 3 days a week and overseeing the ranch accounts on the other days, while Nathaniel balanced his medical responsibilities with learning cattle management. Yet now there were moments when their hands would touch in passing, when their eyes would meet and hold a beat longer than necessary, when conversation would flow beyond business into personal hopes and memories. A month after the bell tower accident, Sarah attended the monthly meeting of Pine Creek's Literary Society at Mrs. Jenkins' home. The discussion centered on a recently arrived copy of Little Women, which several of the women had been taking turns reading. "Miss Mitchell, you've been unusually quiet today," Mrs. Jenkins observed as tea was served. "Is everything well at the ranch?" "Quite well," Sarah assured her. "The partnership with Dr. Hayes is proving successful beyond our expectations." Mrs. Bennett exchanged knowing glances with several other women. "Just the business partnership, dear. The whole town has noticed how the doctor looks at you." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. Dr. Hayes and I share common interests and responsibilities. Naturally, we've developed a friendship alongside our professional association. Friendship, Tori Reynolds repeated with amusement. She had been welcomed into the literary society despite her occupation. Another example of Pine Creek's practical approach to social boundaries. Is that what they're calling it these days? The other women laughed, not unkindly, and Sarah found herself smiling despite her embarrassment. These frontier women were direct in ways that would have scandalized Philadelphia society, but their candor was refreshing rather than offensive. Whatever exists between Dr. Hayes and myself is still undefined, Sarah admitted. We've both been focused on establishing the ranch and maintaining the practice. Mrs. Jenkins patted her hand. Take it from someone who's been married 30 years, dear. A man doesn't look at a woman the way Nathaniel Hayes looks at you if he's thinking about cattle and account books. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Sarah's thoughts remained on Mrs. Jenkins' observation. Had she been so focused on proving her competence as a business partner that she'd failed to acknowledge the growing personal attachment between them? That evening, as she sat on the ranch house porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Sarah heard the now familiar sound of Nathaniel's horse approaching. He had been in town all day, handling a difficult case, a pregnant woman with complications that threatened both her life and her unborn child's. As he dismounted and climbed the porch steps, Sarah could see the good news in his face before he spoke. Both mother and daughter are doing well, he announced, settling into the chair beside her. It was touch and go for a while, but they pulled through. That's wonderful, Sarah said, genuinely pleased. She had come to share vicariously in the triumphs and disappointments of his medical practice, just as he took pride in the improvements they were making to the ranch. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, watching as the last light faded from the peaks and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Sarah found herself unusually aware of his presence beside her, the faint scent of soap and antiseptic that clung to him, the sound of his breathing, the warmth that seemed to radiate from him in the cooling evening air. Sarah, Nathaniel said, finally, his voice quiet but intense. There's something I need to discuss with you. She turned to face him, heart quickening at his serious tone. Is there a problem with the ranch? No, nothing like that. He shifted in his chair to face her more directly. It's about our partnership. Oh? Uncertainty filled her. Had she somehow failed to fulfill her responsibilities? Was he reconsidering their arrangement? Nathaniel leaned forward, his expression earnest in the gathering dusk. When I proposed our business partnership, I believed it would be beneficial for both of us, financially and professionally. What I didn't anticipate was how much your presence would change everything else in my life. Sarah held her breath, afraid to break the moment with words. These past weeks, working alongside you, seeing your strength during the bell tower crisis, watching you create your place in this community. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I find myself wanting more than a business partnership, Sarah. The directness of his statement, so characteristic of the man, made her heart race. What exactly are you proposing, Nathaniel? He reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. I'm proposing that we consider a different kind of partnership, one based not just on mutual advantage, but on mutual affection, perhaps even love. The word hung in the air between them, at once terrifying and exhilarating. Sarah had come west prepared to make a practical marriage to a stranger. Instead, she had found independence, respect, and now the possibility of something far more profound than she had dared to hope for. This isn't an impulsive suggestion, Nathaniel continued, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I've thought about it carefully, We work well together. We share values and goals. And I believe we could build a life together that would be richer than either of us could create alone. Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing the sincere emotion there. When I came to Pine Creek, I was prepared to marry William Cooper after only knowing him through letters. Yet with you, Nathaniel, even after these weeks of working closely together, I find myself hesitating. Do you know why? He shook his head, slightly concern flickering across his features. Because this matters more, she said softly. With William, I was seeking security and purpose. With you, I would be risking my heart. Understanding and hope dawned in his expression. Are you saying, I'm saying that my feelings for you go far beyond business partnership or even friendship, Sarah admitted. But I'm afraid, Nathaniel, afraid that I'm once again seeking a practical solution rather than a true marriage. Nathaniel's hand tightened around hers. Sarah Mitchell, there is nothing merely practical about my feelings for you. When Tommy Parker woke after the accident and I saw the relief in your eyes, I knew then that I loved you. Not for your organizational skills or your head for figures, but for your compassion, your determination, your courage in facing whatever life presents. He rose from his chair, still holding her hand, and knelt before her in a gesture so traditional. It nearly made her laugh despite the solemnity of the moment. I'm not William Cooper offering a practical arrangement sight unseen. I'm a man who has worked beside you, who has seen your strengths and weaknesses, and who loves you exactly as you are. Will you marry me, Sarah? Not for the ranch or the practice, but for us? Sarah looked at the man kneeling before her. This educated, compassionate physician who had seen past her limp to her capabilities, who had offered her respect before romance, partnership before passion. In his face, she saw not the desperate hope she had pinned on William Cooper's letters, but the solid foundation of genuine knowledge and acceptance. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. Yes, Nathaniel Hayes, I will marry you. His smile was radiant in the gathering darkness as he rose and gently drew her to her feet. When his lips met hers in their first kiss, Sarah felt as if every step of her journey, even the painful ones, had been leading her to this moment and this man. 3 weeks later, they were married in Pine Creek's church, the bell tower now rebuilt and stronger than before. The entire town turned out for the celebration, from the mayor and his wife to the miners from Baldwin's operation. Tory Reynolds hosted the wedding supper at the Mountain Rose, its dance floor cleared for the occasion. As Nathaniel led her in, their first dance as husband and wife, Sarah moved with a confidence she had never known in Philadelphia ballrooms. Her limp was still there, but somehow it had ceased to define her in her own mind or in the eyes of those who mattered. Happy, Mrs. Hayes? Nathaniel murmured as they turned beneath the lanterns. Sarah looked up at the man who had seen her true worth from the beginning, who had offered her respect and purpose when she most needed them, and who now offered her his heart as well. Beyond anything I could have imagined when I stepped off that train. As the music carried them across the floor, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. The mail-order bride with the limp had indeed been abandoned at the station, but in that seeming misfortune, she had found something far more precious than what she'd originally sought. A man who saw her true strength, a community that valued her abilities, and the confidence within herself that had been there all along, waiting for the right circumstances to shine. In the end, what might have been her greatest tragedy had become her most profound blessing, proof that sometimes life's most difficult moments were merely doorways to unexpected joy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.